Albert Camus. I'm fairly confident that I am pronouncing that reasonably well, Albert Camus, although I do not speak French. In high school, I had a Swedish girlfriend who corrected my pronunciation of Albert Camus probably 1,000 times, for which I'm very grateful. Albert Camus is sometimes considered to be more of a traditional humanist than an existentialist. I disagree with that. I think he illustrates that you can be both. In fact, Jean-Paul Sartre wrote an essay introducing existentialism to the general public, the non-specialist public, and he titled it Existentialism is a Humanism. Okay, so you can be both, depending upon how you define humanism. Of course, there are a breadth of positions that can be identified as existentialist, some of them atheistic, some of them theistic, some agnostic. Okay, and actually, we talked about that a little bit, and we will talk about that more before the course is over. So, is life worth living? Camus quipped, "Every morning I ask myself, shall I commit suicide or just have a cup of coffee?" I'm rather fond of that quip myself. Looks like it's the coffee. Okay, and we'll talk a bit about the types of suicide one may commit. There's the literal biological suicide, killing your body, but there are ways to existentially kill yourself while you are still breathing. Okay, is life worth living? Is a question that sounds more profound than it perhaps is. Worth living, what does that mean? What does worth mean? Does that mean I enjoy it? Ludwig Wittgenstein, the great analytical philosopher, said, who, by the way, was a very big admirer of Soren Kierkegaard. Wittgenstein once said, "I don't know if there's a reason for our existence, but I'm pretty sure it isn't simply to enjoy ourselves and be happy." Well, many would say that it is, but is life worth living? I should be asking, is my life worth living? Worth living to whom? Okay, well, to me. Right? It's not like, if I take someone from halfway around the world, born in very different circumstances, and say, "Well, you want to live McKinster's life?" They'd probably say, "I don't even understand what McKinster's life is," just as I might not understand theirs without a good deal of investigation. Is life worth living has to be couched in more specific, concrete, and personal terms. Is my life worth living? I don't have to jump out of bed in the morning saying, "Oh, I'm so happy to be alive." The life coaches suggest that that's exactly what you should be feeling, which I think saying that only manages to induce some shame and guilt about saying, "Oh, dear God, I got to get up and go to work." Or this again? Many people wake up and say, "This again?" Well, okay. Suicide, according to Camus, is bad faith. Okay? Bad faith insofar as it denies our freedom, it negates our ability to question and investigate. It's a sort of an embracing of sleepwalking through life, living without awareness. How do we commit that kind of suicide? Well, a very common way is to simply embrace ready-made answers, if you will, ideologies, whether they are secular or religious, that say it's all settled already. You don't have to concern yourself about it. Okay? Oh, really? No. You do have to concern yourself about it. Wishful thinking, right? This sort of existential suicide where I just kind of shut off my awareness of my own freedom can simply amount to wishful thinking. Don't worry. It's all planned out. It's all set. Does that make you feel like a rat in a maze? Or does it seem like, you can be assured that everything will work out for the best? Real. Yeah. Do you know much about human history? Do you know that in a certain amount of time, our sun is going to supernova and the Earth will be destroyed, and all trace of humanity, unless we've managed to migrate to some other planet and some other galaxy, all trace will be gone. I remember when I first learned about the fate of the solar system. I was fairly young, and my first thought was, it will be like Shakespeare never wrote. It will be like Michelangelo never painted or sculpted. It'll be like Beethoven never wrote a note of music. And that it did fill me with a great deal of, if you will, anxiety. I think it's an existential term. Of course, I was fairly young at the time, so I didn't identify it as being that. There was a popular comedy movie in which, I have to say it was a Woody Allen movie. I know Woody Allen has been accused of many unfortunate things and nefarious things, but it's a wonderful scene where a young boy who's supposed to be Woody Allen at a young age has been dragged into the psychiatrist's office by his mother. And she's telling the psychiatrist he won't do his homework because of something he learned in school. And the little boy says, the universe is expanding. The universe is everything there is. One day it will all break apart. It will be the end of everything. And she says, we live in Brooklyn. Brooklyn's not expanding. The psychiatrist says, well, why don't you want to do your homework? The kid says, what's the point? What's the point? Well, of course, that's despair. That's existential despair. It says we're going to all end. There will be no trace of us. What's the point of doing anything? The point is we're alive right now. Okay? Does life have meaning? Does my life have meaning for me? Has to be contextualized, temporalized. Does my life have meaning for me now? If not, then I'm denying my ability to choose a life that means something to me now. Okay. Another way of committing existential suicide is simply selective inattention. I will not pay attention to those things that might make me aware of my own mortality, that might make me aware of my own infidelity to my values, of my need to choose. Ideologies can be an opiate. This is what Karl Marx said about religion. Religion is the opiate of the people. Opium was often used to, in a medical context, in the 19th century, it was used to help people sleep. Okay, so yeah, religion, or for that matter, today, existentialist philosophers might say, Marxism for that matter, might be an opiate. It allows you to simply go to sleep instead of having to be aware of your own life, your own relationships, your own possibilities, and to choose, and to embrace the necessity of choosing. Albert Camus says that it's necessary for existentialism to be atheistic. Why can't I kill God within me? Asks the knight in the seventh seal. God has turned his face away. God is silent. Then why can't I kill God within me? Because there is this longing within. What you actually can't kill is this longing to have all these matters settled, to not be cursed with freedom and the responsibility that comes with freedom of trying to live authentically. That burden's gone because because it's all settled. Well, the absurd man, what Camus refers to as the absurd man, realizes the futility of human effort, but does not sink into apathy or despair. To fully embrace the futility of your efforts is a kind of existential heroism. Now, when we say futility doesn't mean that it's going to, it means nothing to me. Let's say I'm working to overcome certain injustices in the world. I know I'm not going to abolish injustice from the world. Let's say I'm working to alleviate human suffering. I know that when I'm done, there's still going to be oceans of suffering left. Camus once wrote, "It may be true that we cannot make this into a world where innocent children suffer and die, but we can reduce the suffering and death of innocent children, and if we don't, who will?" His three major novels, The Stranger, The Fall, and The Plague, of those three, The Plague deals with this kind of existential heroism. The doctor is in a plague-ravaged city during a time of war, which is, the plague is, I don't want to say a metaphor for war, but it stands parallel to the war. Okay? Plagues will always happen. Wars will always happen. We can do our best to try to avoid them, but they happen. They will happen. We cannot control other people's choices. So, the doctor, who is the main character in The Plague, realizes that he's trying to bail out a tsunami with a cup, basically. To use an awkward metaphor, but one that is one that emphasizes the futility. I'm going to do what I can do, and that's all I can do. Now, because what is the alternative to that? The alternative to that is to live inauthentically, to give up. In which case, why even be alive? The three novels for which Camus is best known are The Stranger, the Fall, and The Plague, as I've just been discussing. The Stranger is a very simple novel in many ways. I mean, the narrative is fairly simple. A man walking along the beach in Algeria shoots an Arab and kills him. Why? He has no reason. He just does. He doesn't feel anything about it. The character's mother dies. He realizes, I don't feel anything. I could pretend that I felt something about my mother dying, but I just don't. And eventually he realizes that he doesn't matter, and nothing matters to him. It's been commented very often that you're probably familiar with a song by the group called Queen, called Bohemian Rhapsody. And there's apparently good reason to believe that Bohemian Rhapsody was inspired by the novel The Stranger. Okay, nothing really matters. Just killed a man. Nothing really matters. Okay, that is essentially The Stranger. The absurd man, the man who simply embraces absurdity, embraces futility, and says, heroically, "Ha! I scoff in the face of futility." Rather, one who is overcome like he's been hit by a wave and simply drowns in absurdity. The Fall is about essentially a man who is his strategy for life is bad faith, beginning to end, bad faith. Pretend to be something you know you're not. all the time, knowing that the words coming out of your mouth are lies. Okay, Camus wrote, "The only way to deal with an unfree world is to become so absolutely free that your very existence is an act of rebellion. My stance in life is going to be one of refusing bad faith, refusing cowardice, refusing surrender. My very life is an act of resistance, an act of rebellion. Literal suicide would be surrender. Embracing absurdity is existential rebellion." So yeah, the world is absurd. And? And I will continue. Camus writes, "One must imagine Sisyphus happy." Now, you know I take it, the myth of Sisyphus. Sisyphus offended the gods by, among other things, cheating death. And don't mess with death. Because he had cheated the gods and so deeply offended them, they punished him not by killing him, but by doing something that was horrifically worse than simply dying, and that is, you must for eternity, live in complete futility. Repetition, futility, and it's all the same all the time. Remember I told the story when we were talking about Sartre, the story of the drunk that I encountered when I was a kid, who came out of the bar, looked around at the sunlit world and said, "It's all the same." I was clearly despairing about the fact that, for a little while perhaps I numbed myself to the tedium and the pain of my life. But I have to leave the bar sometime, and when I do, I see it's all the same. So, we must imagine Sisyphus happy. What does happiness mean in this context? It would seem to mean being able to simply accept the limitations of one's own existence, and nevertheless to appreciate this imperfect existence. I don't think it would be too extravagant to say to have actual gratitude. Like every particle of that rock that Sisyphus is rolling up the hill, only to see it roll down again. Every particle of every mineral in that rock is miraculously beautiful and something to be appreciated. Well, take that as a sort of a metaphor for everyday life. Without an awareness of mortality and awareness of absurdity, we're stuck with metaphors. Everything happens for a reason. Really? How do you know that? Well, I'll make something up. So a friend of mine once said, "It may be true in some sense that everything happens for a reason, but if so, that reason is usually physics." Well, let them eat metaphors is not a solution to life. We need to understand, but is there something to understand? We feel a need to understand. We feel a need for all of this to mean something. What's the point? What's the purpose of my rolling this rock up and having it roll down again? What's the purpose of fighting the same battles every day, year after year? What's the purpose of blah, 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 blah? It presumes that there is a purpose, that there is something. I want to understand presumes that there is something to understand. Remember in the seventh seal, when the knight finally loses the chess game to death and says, well, on the other hand, I've kind of won because I will soon understand your secrets. And death looks at that chillingly blank look and says, I have no secrets. Okay. There wasn't anything to understand. Well, can you, in fact, find meaning in the mundane details of your life? Can the mundane be beautiful? The mundane devours your life. Let's say you're going to make yourself lunch. Okay, well, I'm really going to enjoy this lunch. How much time do you spend acquiring the ingredients for the lunch, deciding what to do, cooking if cooking is involved or whatever, and cleaning up afterwards? Hopefully you clean up afterwards. Maybe having to go to the store to get items for the lunch. There's all kinds, and we're not including actually having to go to work in order to earn the money, to be able to go to the store, to buy the ingredients for the lunch. Look at how all this whole ocean of mundane detail is devouring your life. So what? Those mundane details make up your life, like the many different stones in a mosaic. These are the details that make up your life. It's a famous story. I know I quote Zen Buddhism. It was Buddhism a lot, particularly Zen Buddhism. In this context, it seems to fit very often. An elderly abbot was told, we have good news. The new temple is almost completed. He said, what do you mean, almost? And the young monks, silently told him, there are just a few details left to do. The abbot became very upset and said, just a few details? Nothing exists but details. Okay? There are two expressions that you sometimes hear in Western literature. The devil is in the details, or God is in the details. Okay? In other words, the details are the stones that make up the mosaic. You think of, how the mosaics are pictures made of piecing together small bits of stone of different colors and so forth until they collectively make a picture. Well, think of your life in that way too. Can the mundane be beautiful? If the details can't be beautiful, then nothing can. What does beauty have to do with this? Well, if I can look at something and say, that's beautiful, that means that it's moved me. As Plato said, beauty is the ability to inspire love through delight. Okay, when I was working in the software industry, was training a client once. He was talking about talking about trying to learn more about his field, which was accounting, and he said, I can't read novels. They just bore the daylights out of me. But if I have a good text on accounting, I can stay up all night reading that. That stuff is beautiful to me. I thought, I understand what you mean. There are things that I like that other people might find just appallingly boring. Okay? The ability to find beauty, to find delight and beauty in the details clearly makes your life meaningful to you at the time. We are taught in our society to be goal-oriented. Goal-oriented is, to some extent, a denial of absurdity. It's an existential failure. It means I'm not going to, as one Hindu teacher put it, be here now. Instead of that, I'm going to be somewhere else in my thoughts, in my life. I will not actually live my life in the details of my life. I will live it in a fantasy of what may come to pass, which is a kind of a fleeing from your own life. Well, the mundane details are your life. Embrace the absurd. Let it fill your heart. Okay, an American poet named Bukowski is often quoted. I've known Bukowski scholars to say, actually it's in this quotation, to say, find what you love and let it kill you. In other words, put your whole life, put your mortality, your whole life, into what you love about being alive. Okay, while we're on this topic about we must imagine Sisyphus happy, I want to note something that comes from an essay by D.T. Suzuki, who was a great Buddhist scholar, one of the first to introduce Buddhist thought to the West, because he was a very educated man and could write in English. I believe he could also write in French as well. In an essay about Zen Buddhism and psychoanalysis, he wrote, let's compare these two poems. One is by Basho. Basho is a Japanese Zen poet, one of the greats in that genre. When I look carefully, I see the Nazuna blooming by the hedge. That is the poem. Okay. Now, of course, rhythm, meter, then how it sounds and so forth in Japanese is an important part, and translation doesn't completely convey that. But here's the point. Then he goes on in his commentary. Suzuki goes on in his commentary to say the Nazuna is very commonplace, and it's essentially a weed. If I look carefully, there it is, blooming. Right by the hedge. The hedge, and we probably have paid great attention to that hedge, to cultivating it, shaping it, caring for it. And here's this weed growing right by the hedge with a beautiful little flower. As Suzuki puts it, Basho saw this very ordinary thing and bowed to it, bowed from within. This is finding beauty and finding meaning in the ordinary. That's embracing my absurdity. What does this little flower have to do with building empires, reforming governments, cultivating prosperity, making scientific breakthroughs, etc., 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 etc.? Nothing. Nor does it have to. It is a mundane detail that, if appreciated, allows us to imagine Sisyphus happy. And we, of course, are Sisyphus. Now, Suzuki compares that to a poem by Tennyson. Flower in the crannied wall, I pluck you out of the crannies, hold you here, root and all, in my hand, little flower. But if I could understand what you are, root and all in all, I should know what God and man is. Suzuki points out, look at how upset, wound up he's getting. Flower in the crannied wall, I pluck you out of the crannies. He's killed the flower. Instead of like Basho, just bowing in reverence and gratitude to the flower, he killed the damn thing, pulled it up, root and all. I was saying, if only I could get you to reveal your secrets to me, I would understand everything about the divine and about humanity. Well, think about that. Did you, in fact, in pulling the plant out of the cranny, did you destroy the ability to appreciate it? You turned it into a problem to be solved. But it's not entirely clear exactly what a solution would be or why it is a problem. It's often been said that that one thing that the Vietnam War taught to the American military was you don't go in if you don't already have an exit scenario. Okay, Colin Powell in the first Gulf War uh, clearly understood that very well. Know what you're going to know, what the problem is, what you're going to accomplish, and how you will know that you've accomplished it, and then pull back out. Exactly what we didn't do in Vietnam. So, again, a reference to a story from this time from Chinese Buddhism. Bodhidharma, who is credited for bringing Buddhism to to China, or at least a certain approach to Buddhism to China, was once he was simply plowing a field, and a young man who had heard the reputation of Bodhidharma and traveled all the way across China on foot saw him. There he is. There he is. The young man ran up distraught and said, "Master, what is the answer?" Unruffled, Bodhidharma continued to plow the field and said, "The answer to what? What was the question?" The young man was flabbergasted and realized, I don't know what it is. I'm trying to know what I need to ask. Now, he might have asked, why do I feel that there is some great question that needs to be answered? Why do I have this, dare I say, anxiety? Well, we've talked about that before, haven't we? Here I am with this anxiety, thinking that there is some solution that I'm going to get from somewhere that is going to fix it all for me. What would Camus say about that? You're looking for a get-out-of-jail-free card that will allow you to go back to sleep and drift through your life because everything's been answered. Okay. Is life absurd? Yes. So we'll talk about the notion of absurdity at a later class, but talk about it more than we have already. But do we have to have some verbally articulated answer to this great question of existence? What exactly is that great question of existence? Why are we here? That, why are we here assumes that there is a reason. What's the purpose of our life? Why do you think there's a purpose? Are we anthropomorphizing the universe and saying that it has intentions, motives, goals, desires that are manifested in our lives? If we're saying that, that's a very hard case to make. As Christopher Hitchens puts it, if anyone tells you, you can't behold a beautiful sunset and still be an atheist, reply to them, you can't walk through the cancer ward of a children's hospital and still be a theist. Well, yeah, in both cases, there are oversimplifications involved. Why do we attribute anthropomorphic feelings, desires, preferences, goals, motives, and so forth to the universe? Because it's easier to deal with that way. Easier to deal with as long as we don't think about it too much. But we then end up saying, you know what, the explanations we have don't seem to really solve anything or fit anything. And when your myth is challenged, and you know in your heart that that myth is not explaining what it's supposed to explain, is not resolving what it's supposed to resolve, you can become very cranky and mean-spirited and even violent in trying to maintain that myth. So, okay. I'd like to move on to talking about The Guest, um, which many people consider to be one of Camus' really one of his best accomplishments as far as short stories are concerned. There are three characters: Daru, the teacher; Balducci, the minor police official; and an Arab prisoner. Okay. The Arab prisoner apparently killed a family member. Apparently it was over some dispute involving grain. There's a lot of ambiguity. We don't really know what went on and why he thought it was appropriate to kill the family member. Maybe according to his own customs, his own traditions, or his own stance in life, it was something that was proper to do, even though he knew that the laws established by the French would not tolerate the action. He might have thought it was the right thing to do, the honorable thing to do, or he might have just been overcome by his emotions and killed the family member without a good justification for it. We don't know. Well, the prisoner is being taken to be handed over to the police, but Balducci is not going to do it himself. He's going to order, because it is a time of war, he can give the order Daru to deliver the prisoner. Daru doesn't want to do it. Daru's uncomfortable with it. It's not just that it's an imposition, a disruption of his own routines. It's that he's not comfortable doing it. So Daru takes the prisoner to a point where he says, "You go this way. I'm letting you go. I'm giving you food, money, and you go this way, and you can turn yourself into the police station. Go this other way, and you will encounter Arab nomads who will take you in and shelter you. It's up to you." The Arab is panicked and being given the choice. This doesn't fit it's confusing. It doesn't fit his understanding of what's going on. Why is it confusing? What does he feel? Does he feel like, well, it's right and proper that you take me to the police? I did it. I admit it. And maybe he feels the honorable thing to do is to simply embrace the consequences of my own action. I made my choice, and I'll take the consequences. Or maybe he's just confused, like, what are you up to? This doesn't make any sense to me. This does not fit my understanding of how our world works. Well, the Arab apparently goes the route to turn himself into the police rather than seeking freedom with those who would sympathize with him and consider him an ally. Why? Was it simply because it was a part of his accepting his own death? Was he afraid there would be retribution against his community, his family, whatever, if he did not do so? Does he think he deserves the punishment? Does he think that embracing the consequences of his choice is a part of his freely choosing, and therefore to try to give him a way to slip out of the consequences is essentially to deny his freedom, and he's panicked? I mean, if he couldn't articulate it exactly that way, he's panicked by the denial of his choice actually having been his choice. Daru returns, who was a school teacher, returns to his classroom. He finds that someone has written on the chalkboard, "You have delivered our brother. You handed over our brother. You will pay for this. And just to his position, I didn't want to do this. Well, Daru, some people have interpreted this as Daru is simply trying to evade having to make a choice. Okay, I won't tell Balducci, I won't do it, and stand by that. Balducci, you'll have to arrest me because I won't do it. He doesn't do that. He reluctantly says, okay, fine, I'll do it. And then he looks for ways to get out of it. And he looks for a way to get out of it that will make it not even his choice, but the prisoner's choice. He's not committed himself to taking a stand and following through with it. And in the end, he's going to get blamed for the prisoner's death anyway, and is being threatened with retribution for it, even though he felt like he was not personally responsible for it. Well, was he? Remember, choosing not to choose, says Camus, choosing not to choose is itself a choice. So in the end, he simply, he feels very, very alone. And he is. Just as we are all alone in having to take responsibility for the choices we make and for the consequences and the fallout from our choices and from what we do not choose. So what I want you to look for in the guest is the many ways in which Daru's position is ambiguous, morally ambiguous. How do we make a decision? If you came in with some formulaic ethics that simply said, crank it through the formula and you'll know the right thing to do, it would be very, very difficult to even know what to do, let alone to rest assured that you had made the proper choice. And what do we mean by the proper? Well, one that is authentic, one that endorses our own freedom and the freedom of others. You remember Simone de Beauvoir talks about that, about justice requiring that we not only admit our own freedom and therefore responsibility, but that we do not conduct ourselves in a way that negates the freedom of others and the choices of others. We'll talk about, again at another time, we'll talk about Frantz Fanon, who was an African psychoanalyst and, if you will, a student of existentialism. Jean-Paul Sartre wrote the foreword to Frantz Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth, which is about the psychology, if you will, of colonialism, how colonialism dehumanizes. Racism, says Fanon, is bad faith. The racist is always pretending that things that aren't true, that he knows aren't true, pretending those things are true, is always in denial that who he is and what he does is real. Well, this story takes place, the guest, during the Algerian War for Independence. It was a long and very nasty war. I don't know. As wars go, this was nastier than many. France had occupied Algeria for, I believe, 132 years. On July 5th, 1962, Algeria declared its independence. The French, French Foreign Legion, these are pretty tough guys. It's estimated by some sources that 1.5 million, yes, you heard that, 1.5 million Algerians were killed during this war. Homes and lands were confiscated, right? And remember, as Shylock says in The Merchant of Venice, if you take from me the means by which I live, you take from me my life. This is an issue that comes up very frequently in discussions about the relationships between Israel and Palestine. If you take from me the means by which I live, you take from me my life. There were accusations of genocide. There was quite openly pretty hideous torture that was practiced quite regularly. 40-some skulls of independence fighters from Algeria were shipped to the Paris Museum, where they were put on display. Aren't you glad we're civilized? In May of 1945, the celebrations in Paris because Germany had been defeated. Algerians in Paris used that as a occasion to demonstrate for independence. Okay, you have thrown off the danger of tyranny from the Nazis. We want to throw off the tyranny of oppression from France. Well, the French army opened fire on the demonstrators, and it's estimated that over 300 of them were shot down and killed. Okay? Just to put the icing on the cake, the French tested nuclear weapons in a part of the Sahara that was abutting Algeria, and in doing so, it's estimated by some human rights groups that literally thousands of Algerians ended up sick or dying or dead from radiation contamination. Okay. Put the guest into the context of that very, very nasty and brutal war. Okay, that doesn't make things clearer, it just makes things more urgent and vital. Okay, I'm not going to tell you what I think lessons you should draw from the guest, but I think part of what Camus is trying to tell us is there are no ethical formulas that we could derive from this and say, if we only did this, we would be doing the right thing. Life was not designed to be, well, it was designed at all, but it was not designed to be ethically unambiguous. So, draw what lessons you can. I hope that you enjoy the Camus reading.